Great, lovely. My name's Julia Davis, and I'm the founder of Yoga Teachers Forum. And I'm here today with Tessa Sanderson, and we're going to be talking about circle holding. And just to give you a little introduction or some ideas about who we are and what we do. We both run trainings within the Yoga Teachers Forum, and circle holding is very much part of the skill set that we use and that we share in the training that we run. So an example of that is that Tessa runs the newly FEDANT accredited, it's brand newly FEDANT accredited now, birth preparation training. And in that training, she has a requirement that people come to the vast majority of it live, so that it can be held as a circle, and circle skills can be shared as part of that training, and skills such as shared listening skills, which we're going to kind of go into a little bit more detail about, holding a safe space. The same is true of the Yoga Nidra and circle holding training that we're running. The training that we've got coming up very shortly is full, and we have had people asking, can I book onto this and then not attend 5 out of the 6 trainings? Can I catch up later? And there's a reason why the answer is often no to that for some of our trainings, because it involves circle holding. It involves being part of a community as you do the training, as much as it's not in person, and it's a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours a week, which can be really beneficial for those of us who've got to run around and pick people up and live our lives outside of our work. The actual being in community with others is a key component of what that is. So do take a look after this talk at the trainings that we run at yogateachersforum.org, and the trainings that are run by Tessa. So there are things which aren't circle training. So for instance, the State of Birth Symposium, lots of people come to that. It's not a held circle, but at the end of the State of Birth Symposium, that there can be a coming together of people, which is some form of circle. So there are some that are and some that aren't. Tessa's got a specific training which will dip the toe into circle holding, coming up on the 20th of March. So I'll make sure that there's a link to that training after we've had this conversation. I feel like I've spoken quite a lot. I'm going to say one more thing. It's International Women's Day. I wanted to recognise that. And we've got a couple of charity partners that you might not be aware of, or charities that we like to support. One's much more of a charity partner because they are involved with the State of Birth Symposium. One is Bloody Good Period. Their logo and a link through to the charity is on the homepage of the Yoga Teachers Forum. They're doubling all donations to the charity. Periods are something that can be really tricky and difficult in times of conflict, and it can be really strongly affecting of people who are in conflict situations. So if you want to find out more about that charity, just go to our homepage, click through, and we love the charity Bloody Good Period. And the other one is for the second year running, our charity partner for the State of Birth Symposium, which is you're going to hear all about it with whistles and bells towards the end of this month, the beginning of next month. It's just being kind of created. The cauldrons are being, working to create that event at the moment, is the Happy Baby community. And there's been a lot of talk about refugees, in the press and everywhere at the moment. And it is a charity that supports vulnerable women and children who are refugees. It is a UK-based charity, and we hope that more and more refugees from countries where there's conflict occurring, such as Ukraine, will actually be able to make it to UK shores, so that charities like Happy Baby Community can do their amazing work with them. I'm now going to pass you over to Tessa and just ask you kind of why circle holding? Why are we choosing to be in community in this way, in circle?
Yeah, well, if I start with sort of talking about why I'm doing it, why am I talking about this, running a workshop? I've been running a women's circle for nearly 8 years. And I really dove into that. I just suddenly felt the need to connect with women in my community of different age groups. I just moved to a new town and I kept meeting people the same age as me with the same age child, but I wanted to know some younger women and older women and feel like I was very much integrated into a community. And I had been to circles through retreats that I'd been on, so I did have some experience of it, but there wasn't anywhere close to me, close enough that I could go on a regular basis. So I just jumped into it. And at the time, I couldn't find any training that really helped me make that leap. And so I've sort of developed my skills over time through trial and error. And it would have been so nice to have somebody holding my hand right at the beginning, just giving me that little boost of confidence to say, yes, go for it. It's such a meaningful thing to do. It's just one of my favorite things, because to be listened to is that properly is actually something very rare. You know, we meet lots of people in our life, we talk, we ask, how are you? How often do you have the experience? Is that your dog? How often do we have the experience that actually the person doesn't listen to us when they've asked how you are? And when you come into a circle and it's that special space where you're going to take it in turns to be heard and really seen and witnessed in your experience. And you don't have to agree with that, you know, or really understand that person's experience totally, but just to be heard is so life-changing. I can't tell you the number of things that have happened as a result of the women's circle in people's lives. Really massive changes, because finally they felt, yes, I am enough as I am, and there's people who listen to me and my experience and value that without having to change anything about it. So, you know, it's a wonderful thing to get involved in as an individual, but also then to train and be able to apply it to whether you're a yoga teacher or maybe you're a doula, if you're in the birth world, and just being able to help people deepen the relationships and connections between people. Or maybe you work with children, so you could have teen circles, or on Sunday I ran a mother and daughter circle. And, you know, these are mums that talk anyway about bodies and puberty quite openly, but when you see all the other mums talking very freely, it just takes the subject to a new level. There's an openness and a normalization that happens. So I just want to get across how powerful this can be. But because of its power, I think sometimes people feel really nervous about taking the leap into holding circle, because it can feel like quite a responsibility. So I don't know, Julia, if you want to say a little bit about creating that safe space. You know, how do we set up that space for that magic to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just noticing my doorbell's just gone a gazillion times. I'm hoping that I'm gonna stay with the process, and if it goes mad again, I'll run and I'll come back again.
I'll take over. It's fine.
I'm working from home. So what I was thinking of as you were talking was the circumstances in which you might have had a circle held for you and not known it, but experienced it. So, for example, one of my first ever yoga teachers, she always had us in a circle when she was teaching. And as much as it wasn't a talking circle, because we were in circle, it didn't feel like there was a leader in front of us instructing us what to do. Mm-hmm. So that can be something that we can think about, is literally the space in which we are working, and whether it feels like it's a leader and a student, or whether it is a circle where there's kind of freedom. And some spaces really work for that, and some spaces we need to be a little bit more creative. So there might be a reason why we choose, you know, where a space has somebody at the front and then other because you can fit more people in, or whatever it is. But can we create a space where it doesn't feel as if it is boss and employees or leader and followers. So that was kind of something that came up for me. And as far as a safe container is concerned, if we're creating circle where sharing is occurring, and that can be one of the most powerful parts of being, leading a circle or running a circle, there's a difference between having a conversation with someone where you don't kind of say, well, I'm saying, I mean, sometimes people do say, I'm saying this is only for you, and I don't want it repeated. But generally speaking, we just have conversations. When we create a circle, there are really special things that we can do. So, for example, simple things like making sure that it's a clean space. Maybe we kind of create some kind of loveliness around it. We make it a comfortable, attractive, nice place to step into. So if we're using a community centre, it might be a case of sweeping the floor and putting out some nice blankets, or making sure that we've got facilities to make cups of tea, that sort of thing. And then ensuring that the space is held in a way that people know that it's a confidential space. So you bring up the word confidentiality, then it gifts people a freedom to speak in a way that they might otherwise have spoken, and to listen in a way that they might otherwise have not listened. And there are very specific ways, maybe this is something that you could speak to, is we're very used to listening. And this is something that we're having to do in the conversation that we're in at the moment. We're having to do this because we're kind of listening to each other to see what threads we're saying that we can pick up on that'll help people understand what circle is and how it works. And that is the way that often we think we're listening to someone, thinking about how we're going to respond to what they say. And often in circle, that is something that is taken out of the circle. It's like, actually, we are here as witnesses and not as problem solvers or responders. We're here to witness. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what that looks like, because sometimes, sometimes it's a really unique experience for people.
Yeah, I was thinking of different kinds of spaces, because I was also going to say, with the physical space, it's about having a place where you're not overlooked. So I have held circles in my garden, for example, but I've thought carefully about where I'm positioned in the garden so that we don't have a sense of being overlooked by neighbours. There's a sense of privacy, and also making sure it's a space where you're not going to be overheard. So, for example, there's a class I go to, not as a teacher, but as a participant, where it would be very hard to hold a circle there because there's always another class going on in the room adjacent, and there's often music coming through, and there might be somebody come through the wrong door who's trying to find the toilet, and there's just those interruptions. So I think it's really worth spending the time trying to find the right place for a circle. I started my women's circle in a venue where I teach yoga. It's beautiful for yoga, but it just never quite lent itself. I think you're right about that, making it a special space, beautifying it, or coziness is really important for intimacy and getting to that level of sharing that we're wanting to do. So at different times it's been in my lounge, which feels very cozy. It's also, I've had it in a yurt on the edge of a wood, which has been beautiful in a circular structure. That works very, very well. So I think there's that kind of space to think about. And then, there's the other element of space, like how do we make space in our lives? That's what's special about it. You're saying, I'm making the effort to go to this circle because I want to have space to really listen, and I think you do that. It's partly the setting up, I think, is really important. I spend time beforehand setting my intentions for the circle, so it's not I just turn up and I deliver. I'm facilitating, but I spend some time beforehand just seeing where I'm at, checking in with my nervous system and how I am. And I'll have planned a sort of theme for the workshop. But sometimes I change it quite last minute because I tune into something that makes me feel like something else wants to be expressed. And I also tend to make a centerpiece. Might be of flowers in summer, it might be of candles on a mirror, but it just makes that space feel a bit special and a bit different from normal. And so you're using all these different ways of signaling to the people coming into the circle, there's something different going on here. And then in terms of creating the container, yeah, like you talked about, that confidentiality, because sometimes my women's circle has got quite big, so there might be people who are there on the night who know other people that couldn't make that one, and you know want to try and avoid saying, oh, you'll never guess what happened in the circle. The people weren't there, and unless it's their experience, it really shouldn't be shared to anybody else. So there's sort of psychological ways that you're creating the space as well. And I think for me, it's very much about curiosity. How can we bring a curiosity, a welcoming presence to somebody and what they're talking about? Because we often talk about being non-judgmental, but I think it's very hard, actually. That's an easy thing to say, don't be judgmental, but it's very, very hard to do. Because you might have these reactions come up to something somebody says, but it's having that moment to go, oh, that's interesting, I had that reaction. Being curious about your judgment, being curious about that person's experience. You don't have to share the judgment. So there are these guidelines that we use at the beginning of a circle to sort of set the scene and mark this as something different and help guide people into that deeper listening. And so sometimes as a facilitator, you might have to say, whoa, hang on, we're talking over each other. Let's just pull it back and take a deep breath. Okay, one at a time, because we all really want to hear what each person has to say. Yeah, and I think the other thing that I feel is really important at the beginning of a circle is to say, to take emotional responsibility for how you're feeling. Because unless somebody tells me at the end of the circle that they're feeling a bit unsettled by what came up, or they didn't understand something that was said, maybe, unless they tell me, I can't do anything about it. So I say, please take responsibility. And I think that's a special kind of space where you're making these things very explicit. That goes back to what you were saying, Julia, that most of the time we don't explicitly say this is confidential. We sort of make assumptions. But if you can make it explicit, everybody's on the same page, and it helps to make that coherent connection and space between you.
Yeah, and what I loved is that we had to think about where circle holding might occur, where might those circle holding skills be useful. And I know that there are a number of us who are kind of thinking, well, we're allowed out now. I've got this lovely community that I do X with. Maybe I've run a mother and baby group, and the babies are a little bit older now, and I'd like to give the opportunity for the parents that I've been holding to come away. Or maybe there's a yoga class that you've got, and you're like, oh, actually now I feel like now's a good opportunity to do a retreat day or something that's a little bit bigger. And that's where circle holding skills can really come into their own, because if we're spending a day together, there will be like, you'll be thinking about, well, how is that day going to begin, and how is that day going to end, and what are the practices? For instance, if you're doing a yoga day, we're not going to be practicing physical practices from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. you would imagine. So are there special things that can occur in that day that might make the community feel more coherent? And that's something that we've really missed, or have been created in very different ways. One of the skills actually that we have built, Tessa and I, over the last 2 years, is creating online circle. And actually we have no intention of ending the online circle opportunities that we've created. And there's a very specific skill set to running online circle, to running in-person circle, to running circles that are a retreat, to running circles where there might be different people dropping in each week. So
can I give an example of the difference a circle makes? Because every Saturday I run a pregnancy yoga class, and we once a month we'll have a social, and a lot of those people will come through into a birth preparation workshop. But what I've never done before is hold a talking circle for the pregnant students that come. And so I did this last Saturday, and it was incredible. I've known some of these women through 2 pregnancies already, and they've come to mother and baby yoga, and they've come to well women yoga. But given this opportunity, there were 9 of us there. I learned things about them that morning that I didn't know in all of those years of them coming to the classes. And we chat a lot in my classes. We always share our names and how we're feeling, but there was a level of depth that was just incredible. And I know that just from that, those women they all swapped numbers and created a WhatsApp group, and it's setting the bar for honest communication, not having to put on a front, but say it's okay to be with all the emotions that come up. And I'm happy to witness that in you. That just takes the relationship to a new level. And I just thought, this is so powerful, because now as they go into motherhood, they've got that community of women just from that one meeting. We'll continue with it, but from that one circle alone, I felt like it changed everything.
Yeah. And I think something that is worth thinking about in terms of the groups that we hold or the classes that we run. I remember there was a class that I went to for a number of years, a few classes that I've went to for a number of years. And I didn't really know the names of the other people that went to the class. I was I loved the class. I'd go every week, but I didn't know the other people. I hadn't been brought into community with the other people who were part of it. And that was an intention that I set for myself when I began teaching my yoga classes, is that I'm creating a community here. How can I create a community? Well, if people don't know each other's names, you can't create community. So how can I create an environment where it feels comfortable to share names? And then, right, okay, I'd like to share deep relaxation practices with my community. Okay, deep relaxation practices can sometimes have unusual reactions or reactions that don't fit with the intention of the practice. What can I do to ensure that that's a held space and that's recognized? Okay, well, that needs to be done in circle, because then people can feel safe to share their experience of what they're doing. So it's really worth thinking about what we are choosing to do, how we are choosing to step into the world as practitioners, and how we'd like to be really holding space for people when we do that. And maybe, I use the word holding space as if everybody knows what it means. But maybe, Tessa, you can kind of say what those 2 words, holding space, for you.
That's a big question. I was just going to say first, though, that I think there are different levels of holding circles. So if you're new to it, it might simply be quite radical in your class, like Julia's described, to, before you lie down for the relaxation, because in my well-known class, we start with the yoga Nidra and then we go into the asana later. So I go around and we say our names, and it might simply be 2 words for how somebody is. And that just gives me an idea of being able then to gauge the level of the yoga class, where I might ask for 2 words about what helps them relax. And I might weave that into the yoga Nidra. So it could just be on that level. That could be a circle. to get you started. And then as you build confidence, you can then start to hold the talking circles where you actually are going into a lot more depth of and being vulnerable, and that feeling you're in a space where that feels comfortable. So holding space, a big subject. Partly, one way I want to answer it is you're modeling what you are encouraging the others to do. So being okay with silence, and not, as the facilitator, feeling like you have to jump in and fill that space because somebody should be talking, because people need to have time to feel and before they share. Being comfortable with being vulnerable in front of others, because you can't really expect others to do that. So holding that space sometimes is also about modeling how it's done, I would say. And I've found that over the years that I've been doing the circle, as I've been more and more comfortable with being in that vulnerable space and the topics I'm comfortable with talking about, that's definitely reflected in the circle itself. It's being comfortable with big emotions. So, often there are tears, there's often raucous laughter as well. But it's, if you've got a box of tissues, not as soon as somebody starts crying to rush over the tissues, because that might shut down. They might feel like, oh, it's not okay to cry, she wants me to wipe them away. But they're there if somebody needs it, but being okay with letting that person cry.
Yeah, I think what you said about emotions is really important, because maybe if you haven't held circle before, it can be a bit of a shock to know that. So some of us teach in a way that we've always had big things come up as we've taught, and we've had to really learn as we've gone along, because the way in which we teach our classes means that big things come up, and we've had to learn to deal with them and hold space. But if it's not something that you're used to, then understanding that we're not here to answer everybody's questions, like listening is a very, very powerful tool in and of itself, and it's healing in and of itself for the person who is speaking, and also it's as powerful, sometimes more powerful, for the person who is listening. So knowing that is really quite a key and important thing to know, and that we do grow and learn as we go along, but often if we choose a job which involves teaching and sharing, there is a problem fixing gene. And learning how to temper down that problem fixing gene, it may or may not exist. I'm sure somebody who's a biologist will go, there is no problem solving gene, Julia. But that feeling, and then watching as people begin to stand in their own power is really wonderful. I'm going to share a little story. What's happening at the moment have made many of us feel very disempowered. So what's happening in the Ukraine has made us feel very disempowered, or has made me feel disempowered. And then I thought, well, what about the loving kindness meditation? So that a meditation many of us may be familiar with, where we connect to our heart, we connect to the people we love, people we like, and people that we don't like. And then doing that practice maybe with others, everyone sharing their reaction to that, and then from that maybe action coming out of it. So we've done a practice, then we've verbalized what that experience was, and then from that verbalization it may cause action to come out of it. And if we share, for instance, everybody sits and does the loving kindness meditation, and the meditation ends, and then we walk out the room not having shared an experience, then first of all, someone could be sitting with having connected to their heart and then connected to something they don't like, and then we've let them go out the room. Well, is that okay to choose to share a practice that can bring up uncomfortable stuff and then not giving space to unpack it. Some people may say, we're not qualified and should not be sharing a loving kindness meditation at all, because the idea of bringing in something that you don't like into a space could not be okay for someone. But maybe there are circumstances in which it is okay. And if there are, maybe creating a circle in which to look at that might be something that's worthwhile doing. And maybe that's the difference between teaching an exercise class and sharing a yoga practice.
I was just thinking of 2 circles that I've run which were quite tricky. One was quite early on, and I wanted to have this theme of sort of celebrating and really valuing everything that we're about, and I thought that would be a wonderful theme. And what I hadn't realized was that a lot of people would find that incredibly challenging, and so every time I tried to sort of take it in that direction, people would start talking about other people they admired or who inspired them, but it was very hard for them to stay with owning what they're really good at. So that was an interesting one. And then another one, it happened that the Women's Circle was on the day that Brexit had been announced, that it was happening, and I was very emotional and upset about it. And I decided, well, let's talk about that, not the content and the nitty-gritty and whose fault and blah blah blah, but just how is that landing in ourselves? How, you know, what's alive in us after that news? And it went well, but it, you know, with things like that which are maybe more political, or that's a whole nother level of facilitation, to be able to keep saying, let's rein it in, let's stay in the here and now. But I think that's a really helpful thing for helping people's listening and guiding their talking as well. It's like, can we stay in the moment? How is this coming up for you now, rather than telling a story of what happened, like, you know, about maybe an uncle, or you're having a disagreement with, rather than telling that whole story. It's like, as I sit with this problem or this issue, this experience, how does it feel in my body? And that's a good way of sort of helping somebody not to rant, actually. Because I'm sure we've all, if you've been in circle, there have been times where somebody finally has this chance to talk, and talks and talks and talks. And, you know, how do you manage that kind of thing as well?
Yeah.
So I think there are different levels. You can have circles maybe as part of a workshop where you're doing some teaching, and then you're saying, over to you, you know, talk about how this is landing. But then there's another sort of deeper level of coming with a topic where, and this can be very freeing, where you don't have to be the expert, you don't have to know anything about it. You're just saying, let me hear your experience. And that's why my women's circle started, because I'd been tracking my menstrual cycle and finding it amazing and learning lots about myself. But I thought, I really want to know how it is for other people. And so that was the focus, really. And so it wasn't I was teaching anything about the cycle there. I just wanted to hear other people's experience.
Yeah, I think that there are definite layers to the whole holding circle experience and how we want to do it. And I know that somebody might be watching this and thinking, well, I'm an embodiment teacher. And I think that's a really important aspect of this, is that we're holding circle for people to speak, but also that was a really pertinent point you made. It's the body mind speaking connection. So it's noticing what happens in our body when we get the opportunity to speak. So you talked about somebody potentially crying. So that's a physical reaction that they're experiencing in their body. And we've got the opportunity, when holding circle, to give people space to experience what's happening to them as a physical experience. So to listen to other people and feel what happens in their own bodies as they're doing that. So we can choose to hold circle in different ways. There doesn't need to be an explicit mind-body connection talked about, and then it won't necessarily be a big part of the circle. But if we're holding circle in the context of physical practice, then that can be a really amazing thing to bring up. We're not going to have a lot more time here, so there was something that I wanted to bring up, because we might have really specific circles that we're choosing to hold, and we might have a real challenge, because it's like, I'd love to hold circle for teenage girls, but how do I find them? Or I would love to hold circle for the menarche community, the community of people who are going to come into their first bleed. Ouch. Or I'm really getting involved in my own menstrual cycle at the moment. I'd love to create community to talk about that. So there's one step, which is how to hold the circle. And there's the other is that, oh, well, here I am sitting on my own, wanting to practice these circle skills. Where do I go from here? And I know you've held a very wide variety of different types of circle. So maybe that's something that we can conclude this conversation with.
Or in terms of how to attract those people to the circle,
or where you might start, or just little things that, like a little beginning to that, because it's much bigger than people might think. So for instance, I might say, like, we used to run a monthly moon circle at my studio, and we're not running it at the moment because the person who ran it I loved to pieces, and he's not running it anymore, and I wanted to be with her. But that was kind of the spark, is that I really wanted to honor the moon cycles. I chose to have something monthly. I knew who I wanted to hold the space, and then the space grew from there. So maybe that's kind of something that we can talk to, as kind of like, well, where would one start with?
Yeah, I mean, it's your imagination really is the only thing that limits the possibilities. But you could decide to be a facilitator and you're the one that always hosts it, or you can work on a collaborative model where you might work with one other person that helps co-host, or you could actually have it circulating around people's houses. So there's a group local to me that does that. And when they started, they were working their way through the chakras, and they'd be in one person's house, and that person would lead and offer some practices, and then it would rotate to the next person. So for that one, no money ever changed hands, because it was a really completely collaborative process. But what I have noticed is that very often, where there is a facilitator who's keeping track of all the admin and making sure that it's, the world is told about it, sorting the venue, that it tends to have longevity. It can keep going and going because somebody is driving it forwards. I would say maybe a danger of a completely collaborative one is, life happens, maybe people move away. How do you deal with, as the numbers decrease? You need at least one person that's got the overview, I think. But yes, I've run monthly ones. There's a circle that runs 4 times a year, and we have a different sort of theme according to the season. One-off circles for a specific purpose. So there are so many ways of doing it, and it's a chance to be very creative, actually. Yeah.
So if you've been thinking about, maybe you've got spaces that you already hold, or you've got classes that you already run, but you want to create something special from them, or for instance, like Tessa said, you might have a regular group that you're running, but you want to do something specifically for that group in a different way. The reason why we've created this circle holding training is to create an actual circle in itself so that you can experience what the circle holding feels like, and then gain the confidence to stand in your own power to create whatever circle you feel works with the skills that you have. So that it's going to look really, really different for other people. Sometimes we go along to something because it feels like something that could, oh, actually, I want to experience a circle first. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like Tessa's been talking about. I've never sat in circle where, I have, but you may never have sat in circle and had somebody consciously listen to what you say without judgment and go, oh, that sounds delicious. I'd love to do that. Then maybe this workshop on the 20th of March is the first step that you want to take. Or you might be really specific and say, actually, I want to be running this particular type of circle, and I've got really specific questions about what it means to hold space for this group type. And when we come with questions like this, often you begin to answer your own questions. And we are space holders, so we don't always have the exact answer to the question that you're asking. But one thing that's amazing about circle holding is that when you are given the space to articulate your needs, very special things can happen. So have you got any final words for us before we close this conversation, Tessa?
I was just thinking about listening, and that I think sometimes people think of listening almost as a passive thing, because we talk about talking circles and chat shows, and it seems to be the talking is the active thing, but actually, a lot of people know that it takes effort to listen, and sometimes in a circle it can be uncomfortable to listen. And an example I came across recently, which people might like to look into, is a documentary called White Right by Dia Khan, and it was I think it was 2017 that the documentary came out. And she's a Muslim woman who decided, after getting hate mail, to go to America and talk to the white supremacists who'd sent her this hate mail. So this is extreme listening, because being in a room with them, she could feel physically in danger, but she was just so curious to hear what they had to say. And there's some YouTube sort of videos and podcasts of her talking about making the documentary, and it's fascinating. And she says there's some of them, because she developed the trust through just listening, they started to see her differently, and they've actually moved away from those organizations and they've become friends. She didn't do anything other than listen. This is how powerful listening is.
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful way to close this conversation. The power of listening and what that gives both the speaker, but often much more than we would ever imagine, it benefits the listener. And maybe that's one of the things that you and I love most about holding circle, is that we are given a really, really amazing gift of bearing witness. So if you love the idea of holding space, bearing witness, deep listening, active listening, then I would encourage you to join Tessa on the 20th of March for the circle holding workshop. And also think about the way that you want to proceed with the training that you might choose to be doing, and whether you like the idea of being taught to. And there's plenty of trainings where there is content that is important to impart, and then you are receiving that content. Or whether you really love the idea of collaborative learning and really being part of kind of almost like a co-creative community. And if that is what you really love the idea of, then that's one of the reasons why some of our trainings really run over a period of time. So if you are somebody who works in the pregnancy community, I would highly, highly recommend the birth preparation training, because you are likely to make friends for life out of that. If perimenopause is your bag, then I love to imagine that the people that join that community also come out with friends for life, like people that you've deeply listened to and feel a really beautiful, strong connection with. And that's something, that's where the Yoga Teachers Forum came from, was a feeling of isolation. And if we can feel like we're part of a community, then that can make all the difference. And this training on the 20th of March is about community building. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
And I will stop the recording right there.
Yeah, I'll stop the live stream.